OceanGate was warned of potential for catastrophic problems with Titanic mission.
If it wasn't an accident, it then has to be some degree of crime.
When I heard about the submarine people, the first thing I said was, what kind of stupid,
Yeah.
But I forget, I got empathy for the people still.
Joe Rogan didn't hold back when reacting to the OceanGate Titan submarine disaster. He questioned the logic behind the mission, the ignored warnings, and the terrifying way it all ended. From the flawed design to the chilling final moments, Rogan broke down everything that went wrong.
And its decision to forego a traditional assessment could lead to potentially catastrophic problems with the Titanic mission.
And why this tragedy should have never happened in the first place. Was this a case of extreme adventure gone too far, or pure negligence? Let's get into the video and break down what really happened. The dive that changed everything. On the morning of June 18, 2023, 5 passengers boarded a small experimental submersible in the middle of the North Atlantic Ocean.
On June the 18th, 2023, the Titan submersible set out for the wreck of the Titanic.
Their destination, the wreckage of the RMS Titanic, resting more than 2 miles below the surface.
Titan descended 2 miles beneath the surface.
What was supposed to be a daring, high-stakes dive into history quickly turned into a silent disaster. Within hours, the Titan submersible vanished without a trace, triggering one of the most intense and eerie search efforts in recent history. OceanGate Expeditions, the company behind the mission, had been offering trips to the Titanic for wealthy thrill-seekers and history buffs. The idea was simple but bold: pay $250,000 per seat and descend in a carbon fiber capsule to one of the most iconic shipwrecks of all time. OceanGate's founder and CEO, Stockton Rush, wasn't just the brain behind the mission.
On board were 5 men, including the pilot and owner, Stockton Rush.
He was also one of the 5 on board. Also inside the Titan were 4 other men: Hamish Harding, a British billionaire adventurer; Paul-Henri Nargeolet, a French maritime expert who had been to the Titanic wreck over 30 times; and Shahzada Dawood, a prominent Pakistani businessman, joined by his 19-year-old son, Suleiman. According to people close to him, Suleiman had reportedly been hesitant about joining the dive, but ultimately agreed to accompany his father as a bonding experience for Father's Day weekend. At around 8 a.m., the Titan was launched from its mothership, the Polar Prince. It wasn't much to look at: an elongated capsule about the size of a minivan with no seats, limited lighting, and a single small viewport. The interior was cramped, and passengers were required to sit on the floor with their legs crossed. There were no backup communication lines, no GPS while underwater, and only one button to operate the craft. The sub was controlled with a modified video game controller, something that later sparked massive scrutiny and public disbelief. Still, the dive went ahead as planned. The descent to the Titanic, located 12,500 feet below the ocean's surface, typically took around 2.5 hours. About 1 hour and 45 minutes into the dive, the Titan stopped communicating with the Polar Prince. It was radio silence. No pings, no updates, no emergency signals. At first, there was confusion. On board the Polar Prince, the support crew waited for signs of reconnection. A missing communication ping wasn't completely unusual. The system had dropped out on previous dives and reconnected later. But as minutes turned to hours, concern began to grow. What no one on the surface knew at the time was that the Titan had already imploded. Experts later determined that the sub likely suffered a catastrophic structural failure during its descent. The vessel's hull, made of carbon fiber and titanium, had been repeatedly criticized for being experimental and potentially unsafe at such depths. The pressure at the depth of the Titanic is around 6,000 pounds per square inch, enough to crush most materials instantly. At some point, the Titan likely collapsed inward in a split second, killing everyone on board instantly. The passengers would not have felt pain. According to engineers and physicists, the implosion would have occurred so fast, within milliseconds, that the human nervous system wouldn't even have time to register what was happening. One moment, they were descending toward the Titanic. The next, nothing remained but shattered debris. The eerie part? The Titan's disappearance wasn't detected in real time by the public or the media. Instead, the world only learned of the missing submersible several hours later, when OceanGate reported that they had lost contact. The US Coast Guard was notified and began assembling a search and rescue team. Ships, planes, and deep-sea drones were scrambled. For 5 days, the story dominated headlines across the globe. There was a sense of haunting suspense. Could they still be alive? Was the sub intact, stuck on the ocean floor with limited oxygen and no way to communicate? The media played out every grim scenario. People speculated about dwindling air supply, the rising carbon dioxide levels, and the terror of being trapped in a dark capsule in the freezing Atlantic. Discovery on the ocean floor. OceanGate, for their part, released minimal information. Statements were vague. There was no admission of failure, no real-time updates from the crew aboard the Polar Prince. Families of the passengers were given no clear answers. It was only days later that a chilling detail emerged. US Navy officials had detected what they believed to be an underwater implosion using classified acoustic technology. But that information was not immediately shared with the public. As the search continued, the grim reality began to settle in. If the Titan was intact and stuck somewhere, their oxygen supply would have been exhausted by the morning of June 22nd. That same day, debris from the sub was found about 1,600 feet from the Titanic's bow. The wreckage included the front and rear ends of the pressure chamber, clear evidence of a violent implosion. The search was called off. All 5 passengers were declared dead. The public reaction was a mix of shock, disbelief, and growing anger. Questions began flooding in about how a company was allowed to operate an uncertified submersible at such extreme depths. Stockton Rush had been open in interviews about rejecting traditional safety standards, claiming they slowed innovation. He once described certification processes as obstacles to progress. Former employees and industry experts had previously raised red flags. A former OceanGate employee had even filed a lawsuit in 2018, warning about safety concerns and alleging that the company was ignoring proper testing. Many now wondered how such warnings were overlooked, or worse, outright dismissed. But for now, the story had shifted from hope to mourning. Photos of the passengers began circulating online. Families issued statements of grief. Vigils were held around the world. The story of 5 men who descended to view history had itself become history, one of the most chilling modern-day maritime disasters, not because of a storm or a mechanical malfunction, but because of a decision to ignore caution in pursuit of something greater. Before the Titan ever touched the ocean floor, people were already uneasy about OceanGate's approach. Stockton Rush wasn't just a CEO, he was a self-styled innovator, determined to reshape the rules of deep-sea exploration. But his idea of innovation didn't involve following standard procedures. In fact, he actively bragged about avoiding them. Rush believed that regulation held back progress. He often criticized the submersible industry's obsession with safety certification, once stating that it prevented pioneers from doing cool stuff. In one of his more infamous interviews, he claimed that society needed a few casualties to push exploration forward. That comment wouldn't age well. OceanGate's submersible wasn't classed or certified by any regulatory body. Most deep-sea vessels must be inspected by third-party organizations that rigorously test structural integrity and safety systems. OceanGate skipped that step entirely, arguing that because no one else had done what they were doing, traditional rules didn't apply. They called the Titan experimental, a label that legally allowed them to bypass safety requirements while simultaneously selling tickets to tourists. The most concerning choice was the material used for the hull, carbon fiber. Submersibles that dive beyond 3,000 meters are typically made entirely from titanium or steel. Carbon fiber is lighter, cheaper, and used in many high-performance industries, but not at extreme ocean depths. Under intense pressure, even small weaknesses in the material can cause microscopic delamination, which over time compromises the entire structure. Engineers and experts warned OceanGate about this. Some of them, like marine technology expert Rob McCallum, even begged Rush to stop sending people down to the Titan. Former director of marine operations David Lockridge, had filed a lawsuit years earlier, claiming he was fired after raising serious safety concerns about the Titan's design. He said the viewport wasn't rated to survive the depth of the Titanic and that the company refused to do proper testing on the hull, but Rush dismissed the criticism. He believed industry veterans were just too conservative, too afraid of risk. He wanted to be seen as the Elon Musk of the deep sea, someone who would challenge old systems to chase something greater. Instead, he became a cautionary tale, a death trap in disguise. The interior of the Titan was shockingly basic. There were no seats, just a small open space where passengers had to sit on the floor with their backs against the hull. The sub had one small porthole, about the size of a dinner plate, which only one person at a time could use to view the Titanic. For the others, a screen inside displayed what the external cameras saw. There were no windows aside from that one, no toilets, just a bottle, curtain and a small absorbent pad. Passengers were told to eat light meals before descending and were given a sandwich and bottle of water for the 8-hour round trip. The lighting was dim and the atmosphere relied on basic internal fans for circulation. If anything went wrong, there was no emergency hatch. The door had to be sealed shut with 17 external bolts, meaning that even if they survived a malfunction and resurfaced, they couldn't get out without someone on the surface unbolting them. The entire sub was operated using a Logitech game controller. While it wasn't a joke, many people thought it was when they first heard about it. Rush had once shown it off in interviews, joking about how simple the controls were. But after the disaster, that controller became a symbol of reckless design choices. It turned out OceanGate had a few backups on board, but none of that mattered when the hull itself was the problem. There was also no GPS underwater. Once the sub began its descent, it relied on occasional text message-style pings to communicate with the surface vessel. These were sent every 15 minutes. If the sub stopped responding, there was no backup system, no emergency beacon, no black box, just silence. All these shortcuts were sold to the public as innovative, but they came at the cost of redundancy and safety, something that experts say is non-negotiable when dealing with the crushing pressures of the deep sea. The Titan's design may have looked futuristic, but under scrutiny, it was more like a prototype held together by optimism and denial. Every man aboard the Titan had a different reason for going. Hamish Harding was a veteran explorer who had already gone to space and dived to the Mariana Trench. He saw the Titanic expedition as another frontier to conquer. Days before the dive, he posted on social media about the mission, noting that weather conditions were ideal for a descent. It would be one of his last public messages. Paul-Henri Nargeolet, nicknamed Mr. Titanic, had spent decades studying the wreck. He was considered one of the world's leading experts on the site. For him, the dive wasn't a thrill. It was a return to a place he had visited dozens of times before. He had previously used remotely operated vehicles and manned subs to explore the Titanic, but this time he was aboard a vessel far less tested. Then there was Shahzada and Suleiman Dawood. The Dawood family was one of Pakistan's wealthiest and most philanthropic. Shahzada had a love for science and technology. He wanted to experience the Titanic dive as a kind of historic journey. Suleiman, on the other hand, was more hesitant. According to his aunt, the teen was scared and unsure, but went to make his dad happy. He even brought a Rubik's Cube with him, planning to solve it at the wreck site and maybe set a record. It was a moment he had hoped to post about afterward. That moment never came. The people on the Titan weren't just rich tourists. They were adventurers, scientists, and fathers. But they also trusted OceanGate with their lives. They believed the company when it said the Titan was safe. They believed in the future of exploration. They didn't know the design they were sitting inside had already shown signs of wear and fatigue. Joe Rogan's candid analysis. As public reactions poured in, high-profile voices like Joe Rogan added commentary that reflected a deeper public frustration. He spoke on his podcast with a tone that combined disbelief and critical reflection. To him, the story was less about adventure and more about arrogance, money, and avoidable tragedy. He noted the disturbing possibility of passengers inside Titan realizing their fate in real time, perhaps holding on to hope during those final hours or possibly sacrificing comfort, even their own lives, in an attempt to preserve air for others. The idea of a father on board with his son seemed especially tragic. The emotional weight of knowing death was inevitable, and experiencing it in the dark, cold ocean was something Rogan emphasized as deeply unsettling. He also highlighted how wealth had played a role. To him, this was another case of extreme risk taken by individuals who could afford luxury adventure experiences without truly respecting the danger involved. The fact that the submersible had been used for previous missions did not change the core issue. Titan was not built to be used again and again without rigorous checks, and it certainly wasn't built to ignore science. During his discussion, Rogan referenced the lawsuit against OceanGate and the whistleblower's warnings. He brought up the fact that the viewport was never rated for the depth it was being used at, and that the passengers had not been informed of how experimental the sub truly was. He saw the disaster as a tragic lesson in what happens when companies prioritize innovation over accountability, and when marketing takes precedence over engineering safety. There was also a broader discussion about the culture that enabled this, where ultra-wealthy individuals chased increasingly extreme experiences and where those in charge were willing to bend rules to keep offering. Rogan's conclusion wasn't hopeful. He didn't believe there was a hero moment inside Titan. He believed that once it started to fail, there was nothing anyone on board could do. In his words, there was likely silence, and then nothing at all. OceanGate suspended all operations following the confirmation of the implosion. Investigations were launched not just into the engineering of Titan, but into the company's leadership and compliance history. Stockton Rush, who had founded OceanGate and piloted the sub, was among those lost. He had built his career on challenging what he saw as unnecessary regulatory restrictions. In his own interviews, he often spoke of pushing boundaries and trusting innovation over tradition. But the disaster forced a re-evaluation of that philosophy. There's a difference between calculated innovation and reckless experimentation, and in this case, the latter had cost 5 people their lives. The timeline tightens. As the Titan submersible slipped further from communication and closer to catastrophe, the international search efforts only grew more desperate. By the 3rd day, air supply estimates began to dominate headlines. Early reports suggested the 5 passengers had fewer than 40 hours of oxygen left, but with no confirmed contact, no location, and no rescue plan that could realistically retrieve them in time, the outlook was grim. Throughout the search, underwater sonar picked up mysterious banging noises, which sparked hope that someone on board was alive and signaling. The sounds were intermittent and unclear, barely distinguishable beneath the crushing weight of ocean's silence. Even with multiple aircraft, vessels, and remote-operated vehicles deployed, the chances of finding Titan in time were slipping away by the hour. It was a race between deep-sea pressure and the human body's limits. The situation had already passed beyond survival for most experts watching from the outside. What had once been a countdown of oxygen turned into a retrospective of engineering missteps, red flags, and irreversible decisions. And as the world watched, the horror of what likely happened inside that small carbon fiber vessel began to take shape. Eventually, the US Coast Guard confirmed what many feared.
New evidence has been obtained by the US Coast Guard investigating the Titan submersible disaster in June 2023.
The Titan submersible had suffered a catastrophic implosion. Fragments of the vessel were discovered near the Titanic wreck site, including the tail cone and parts of the pressure hull. These were not just signs of damage, they were evidence of sudden, total destruction. Experts explained that the immense pressure at 20,500 feet below sea level would have caused the submersible to collapse inward almost instantly. There would have been no time for panic, no time for calls or recordings. Just one fatal moment where the structure gave out and everything inside was crushed within milliseconds. What followed was an intense review of what had gone wrong. OceanGate's design was immediately under scrutiny. The decision to use carbon fiber instead of steel or titanium, standard materials for deep-sea vessels, was one of the most discussed factors. Carbon fiber can be strong, but it is unpredictable under extreme pressure. Over time, and with repeated trips to great depths, fatigue sets in. This wasn't just an unfortunate incident. It was the result of calculated risks, ignored warnings, and failures in engineering ethics. Investigations pointed to several known concerns. Years earlier, a former OceanGate employee had raised alarms about the integrity of the sub's viewing port. According to court documents, the port was only rated for 1,100 meters, far less than the 4,000 meters needed for Titanic-level depths. When he pushed for more testing and voiced safety concerns, OceanGate allegedly terminated his employment. Legal documents confirmed a lawsuit was filed and eventually settled, but that didn't erase the fact serious red flags were present years before the Titan's final descent. In addition to the internal warnings, a group of over 36 experts from the Marine Technology Society had written a letter to OceanGate's CEO, expressing unanimous concern over the company's refusal to certify the sub with third-party safety regulators. Their fear was that the experimental design and lack of oversight would lead to disaster. They had predicted, in clear terms, the potential for a catastrophic failure. The Titan disaster was more than just a machine breaking. It was about people ignoring clear warnings. 5 lives were lost deep in the ocean. If this could have been stopped, who should be blamed? Will anyone be held responsible? Let us know what you think.